Hey friends, as you know, I'm a biologist, but I'm also a science fiction fan who likes to mix his metaphors. And one of the things I was provoked to talk about was this really interesting essay by Charlie Jane Anders. It's published in Polygon, and I'll include a link to it down below. Uh, but what I want to talk about is, in particular, the opening of this particular article. So let me jump to that. I'll read it to you, actually. So the title of the article is "The One Horrifying Sci-Fi Trope That's Probably Far Too Accurate," with the subtitle, "Can We Not Do This When We Meet Aliens, Please?" So what is it about? Well, she says, science fiction is full of sickening ideas like body snatchers and alien parasites and mind-controlling earworms, but one of the most skin-crawling tropes in science fiction is also probably pretty realistic. Humans eating alien life forms that later turn out to be intelligent. The most famous iteration of this storyline is probably the Futurama episode, "The Problem with Poplars." Is that really the most famous? Well, anyway, in which an addictively delicious snack food turns out to be the children of the Omicronians, who are understandably pissed about people eating their babies. There's also one part of George R.R. Martin's novel, Tough Voyaging, where a group of colonists eat delicious mud pots, not realizing they're a sapient species. And this is pretty common. There's lots of stories like this. According to TV Tropes' exhaustive cataloging of this gruesome story idea, Terry Pratchett's Discworld also digs into the notion. And Joanna Russ's comedic story, Useful Phrases for the Tourist, teaches interstellar travelers to say, "Are you edible?" and "I am not edible." What stimulated her to write this essay was that she has a new novel out. It's called The City in the Middle of the Night, and she says, human colonists eat the indigenous life forms on the planet January, not realizing they're a highly advanced civilization. So yeah, it's weird. This keeps coming up in science fiction stories. You travel to a distant alien world and you land and you discover these things you don't recognize. And what do people do? They eat them. Huh. So I brought a couple of friends here. You can see over my shoulder from the movie Arrival. That's Abbott and Costello. You may recall them if you saw the movie. Uh, so I'd ask you, when you see them, do you think of calamari? Do you think when they looked at us that they would think of long pig? Yeah, so why is this cannibalism stuff coming up all the time? And I think one reason is that, well, humans are just horrible. Yeah, we eat all kinds of things. So we eat whales. They have bigger brains than we do. We eat chimpanzees. We eat elephants. It's kind of horrifying when you think about it. But the truth of the matter is, and this is something that Anders is talking about, is that we have many criteria for what we consider edible, and nowhere in it do we consider the intelligence of the organism we're eating. It's just not part of the equation. So she's saying, well, yeah, it's probably pretty likely it'll land on an alien planet and feel like taking a bite out of the inhabitants. And on ethical, moral, social grounds, yeah, I would agree with her. We're omnivores. This is the curse of omnivory, that we see something, we want to take a bite out of it. But let me make another point here. I'm going to argue not on ethical grounds that we shouldn't eat them, although I would say, yeah, we shouldn't eat an intelligent species, and that goes for the ones that live here on planet Earth. I'm going to suggest that it would probably be a really, 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 really bad idea to take a bite out of a creature that has no shared evolutionary history with us. Let me explain why. Okay, I'm going to get one thing out of the way right off the bat, and that is I don't think it's likely that we'll ever encounter intelligent aliens. Yeah, I know, that's kind of disappointing, isn't it? I think it's a really uncommon event. The stars are distant. Takes a long time to get between them. I don't think it's going to be practical to get there. I will return to this point later in the video. But what it means is this is a moot point. First, we're going to have to encounter aliens. Then we can talk about whether we're going to bite them or not. I don't think we're going to. Okay, so just one big void out there, so forget about it. Another thing I would mention along these same lines is that if we do, by some miracle, happen to meet aliens sometime in the near future, it's not because we had the technology to go find them, because they had the technology to come here. So like my buddies back here. That means that if you try to eat them, they are going to kick your ass. So no, it's not going to happen. So that's one practical point. We'll just get out of the way at the very beginning. But okay, let's take it as an imaginary given that somehow we build interstellar spaceships and we somehow send human beings to a distant world, and when we arrive there, we find that it's inhabited by life. And we land and we're going to explore this world, and along the way we're going to nibble on things, which I also think is really highly improbable. But okay, we're just going to pretend we go to some star a few light years away. We have humans visiting it. All right, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, let's dismiss some of those science fiction tropes. One common trope is starving colonists who land there. They're out of food. They have nothing else to do, but they have to start cultivating the alien planet and eating whatever they can, growing crops, etc., etc. I don't think that's very likely. Why? Because it's such a huge investment. It's so distant to the nearest stars that you're not going to plan on making a one-way suicide trip. You don't want to go there and then discover that there's some horrible fate waiting for you and your entire crew and colony are going to die out. So we're going to presume that before we go out to a distant planet, we're going to have ships that are self-sustaining or so well stocked with food that they can last for many, many generations. So no, forget the starving colonist explanation, all right? The other thing I want to dismiss is, and this is the most common one actually, it's the, oh, I am so ignorant, so I am innocent of cannibalism. No, that doesn't work either. So if we send out a ship to a distant world to explore, the most exciting thing we could possibly find anywhere in the universe is an intelligent civilization on that planet. That's going to be the big one. Any starship that goes out exploring, that's what they're going to be very, very rigorous in testing for. They will have all kinds of eventualities worked out. So yeah, they're going to land. If there's any doubt at all, they will not then kill and eat the inhabitants. All right. So could we stop doing that part of the story? I just don't believe it, not for a moment. This is going to be where you're going to have a science crew that's just begging, itching to find some kind of alien life. That's what they're going to be looking for. That's what they're going to be testing for constantly. And that kind of mistake is going to be really improbable. On the other hand, yeah, of course, we'll point out, yeah, dolphins and whales on planet Earth, Nothing seems to stop us from eating them, even though we know they're pretty smart critters. Okay, so why shouldn't we eat the aliens? There's a really good reason for that, and in order to explain it, I've got to talk about some biochemistry. I hope you don't mind. I'll keep it simple though. So I'm going to focus on just one really crude aspect of biochemistry. You'll be able to understand this. So let's just think about one component of life on Earth. And that one component we'll consider are amino acids. So what are amino acids? Well, here's a diagram to show you. So an amino acid is a very simple structure. It's got a central carbon. I've outlined it in gray on this image. And it's got a hydrogen hanging off it, which we can just kind of ignore for now. And then it's got a carboxyl group illustrated on the right. And it's got an amino group on the left. This is where it gets its name, is amino acid. Okay. And it's also got something called an R group. The R group is a collection of atoms that could be of various sorts. So you can stick all kinds of compounds where it says R. So different amino acids have different R groups, but everything else is the same. The amino part, the carboxyl part, the hydrogen, those are all identical in all amino acids. Now, these are common. We have found amino acids in meteorites, for instance. We have detected them in interstellar gases. So these things happen spontaneously. They occur all the time. So what do I expect? I expect if we go to another world that has any kind of life on it, even one that doesn't have much life on it, we'll find amino acids floating about. Then I kind of expect that any life that does evolve on such a planet will incorporate amino acids into its structure, because amino acids have this other incredibly useful property. These are monomers that can be easily assembled into polymers. So that's what we're seeing here. So on the left, I have two amino acids. Again, the carbon I've outlined in gray, that central carbon, and you can see the amino and the carboxyl group on both of them, and then the R group hanging off, and we're just going to ignore that for now. And what you can do with amino acids is you can smush two of them together, put the carboxyl, the acid part, against the amino part of the amino of another amino acid, and a dehydration reaction will occur. It will split off the hydrogen from the amino group and the hydroxyl, the OH group, from the carboxylic acid, producing water. That's good because we're living in an aqueous environment, so we're going to have water floating around. And then they will form a covalent peptide bond between the two. They will link together. That means that you can daisy chain huge numbers of amino acids together to make a backbone of these peptide bonds with all these different R groups hanging off of it. That's an incredible capability. It's like if you're handed a bunch of Legos, you will start sticking them together. They're really easy to stick together and you'll build more complex things. I kind of expect that if we find another world that's like ours, that's got an aqueous environment, the temperature is about the same as what we've got, you will find amino acids, and you will find that any organisms that live there will assemble them into proteins. That's this structure here. And proteins are so versatile and useful that we kind of expect that most worlds that have anything like our kind of life will look like this. They'll be made up of proteins. Okay, as I said, I'm keeping this simple, so we could also talk about carbohydrates, we could talk about lipids. Those, I think they're all kind of universal, so we would expect to see these all over the place. So this is good if you're interested in the culinary possibilities of an alien world. They're going to be made up of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Yeah, very likely. And we eat those things. So right away we could say, hey, there's potential here. Maybe we could consume aliens on another world. But there are problems, a few problems. Let's talk about one sort of problem, potential problem. And that is that there's another property of amino acids that I haven't talked about yet, and that is that they're chiral. What does that mean? That means that you can have different forms of the molecule that are chemically identical in their constitution, but they are arranged in a mirror image form. These mirror image forms are called enantiomers. So, for example, here's an amino acid. The one on the left is called an L-amino acid. That's short for leaf rotary. That is, if you shine light through them, it tends to rotate the light in a particular direction. On the right, we have a D-amino acid. That's the mirror image of the one on the left. And what's going to happen here is they are going to be incompatible. They're going to act differently in a biological context. Now, if you look at naturally, spontaneously produced amino acids, you will find both the L and D forms in roughly equivalent concentrations. That's called a racemic mixture. If you look at biological organisms, you find one or the other, typically. So, life on Earth uses L amino acids, and only L amino acids, with a few occasional exceptions. There are a few D amino acids that are made that are used for things like signaling, that are used, for instance, in bacterial cell walls, that are used in toxic defenses by plants and other organisms. So mainly, though, it's all L amino acids. All protein synthesis is done with L amino acids. So all of our proteins are made up exclusively of L amino acids. Okay, so what's the worry? Well, we don't know why we're all L and not all D. We understand why we're one or the other. Okay, that's not a mystery. Creationists will sometimes pretend that this is a great dazzling mystery. How could this happen? And the reason we're all one or the other is that biological catalysts, enzymes, have a particular shape that can only recognize one enantiomer. So, if we wanted to use both forms, we'd have to make twice as many enzymes. Actually, more than that, because then if we could possibly have a protein that's a mix of L and D amino acids, you would need all kinds of configurations of different enzymes to deal with that protein. It would be a major problem, really unlikely. So what happened is early life settled on using just L amino acids. It greatly simplifies the whole issue of building new catalysts, new enzymes. Is it necessarily that way? No, not necessarily. We could, in principle, imagine a world where every organism uses D amino acids, because the first life there just happened to pick D amino acids. Now, the probability of that, we don't know. It's possible it was just a flip of the coin, whether you first adopt L or D amino acids. It's also possible that there are biasing factors. So, for instance, there is some evidence that some amino acids will precipitate preferentially in one form or the other, which means that the other form is more available, which may mean that, okay, we go to another world, and it's much more likely that they're also going to be L amino acids. But anyway, just for the hypothetical, let's pretend we go to this planet. We land there. We're exploring. All of the organisms there are made of D amino acids. And we're going to try and figure out what we're going to do. So we're wandering around this planet, and we're really lucky we find space cows. So here's my little cartoon. So there's an Earth cow. It's all made up of L amino acids. That's what we're used to eating. There's a space cow we find in this alien world. It's made of meat. That's all we care about. Lots and lots of meat and fat and carbohydrates and good things in this animal. But it's all D amino acids. And we blithely go charging forward with our laser guns or our lightsabers or whatever, and we start butchering it and we start eating it. What's going to happen? Well, it turns out that all of your digestive enzymes are adapted to handle L amino acids. So you're going to eat this space cow, this space hamburger, and what you're going to discover is the space hamburger is indigestible. You will be able to chew it up. It will have the right texture. It will pass through your gut. It will experience some breakdown in the stomach acids because your stomach acids don't care about chirality of the molecules they're breaking down. So you'll get some slushy breakdown in that stuff, and then it will pass into your intestines, and none of your enzymes will touch it. They won't be able to break down any of those proteins. Uh-oh. So you've got this indigestible mass sitting in your gut. It's going to pass through your gut. Not even your gut bacteria will be able to handle it. Again, there'll be some things that will be able to extract from the meat, but the proteins themselves will be untouchable. And even if you could break them down and bring them into your system, your cells wouldn't be able to use them because they're all the wrong chirality. So this is a culinary disaster. You've just made your gut microbiome upset because you've exposed them to this nasty stuff. What do you think is going to happen? Well, you are going to discover space diarrhea. You may also discover space vomiting. I don't know. We haven't had the experience, so I have no idea what will happen. It's not a good thing anyway. So we've got to hope that this alien world we're visiting has amino acids of the right configuration. I'll mention also carbohydrates are also chiral, and they've all got to be the right orientation there as well. So it's going to be tricky. Everything has to line up or we won't be able to digest it. It'll be just like eating plastic. So that's one nice thing. You could bite the alien and it'll just pass right through your gut and you won't care. It won't help you at all. Okay, I'm going to bring up another unpleasant subject. I mentioned you found a space cow and you go to slaughter it. This is the yuck factor. All right, how many of you, if you've seen a cow, would be able to slaughter it? Yeah, it's bloody, it's messy, the animal complains. Yeah, and you will lose your appetite pretty quickly. I've been hunting, and yeah, hunting is one of those things that completely kills my appetite. And I think that's what would happen here, is you're not going to be able to cope with this at all. Another thing is if you've ever slaughtered an animal, you know that there's a whole associated bunch of not just unpleasant sights, but unpleasant smells, terrible odors coming off of this thing. It takes a while to get used to the smell of blood. Yeah, again, when I've smelt it, it kills my appetite. So here's another situation. If you've got a bunch of incompatible proteins in this animal, those different chiralities also will bind to your taste buds and your olfactory receptors in different ways. It will taste off. So that's going to be a factor. You're going to smell this and you're not going to want to eat it. And if you do eat it, it's just going to taste funny in all kinds of strange ways. So, maybe that's a minor thing. No, it isn't a minor thing. It's a big thing. We're very picky about what we eat. And this creature is going to be strange, going to taste funny, and it's going to be a mess to clean. And there it is, all this gooey, gloppy stuff sitting there. You're not going to want to eat it. And yeah, you might question me on that one. I know some of you are hunters. Some of you may have worked in slaughterhouses. Some of you may be comfortable working in a kitchen with fresh meat, for instance, and you're just going to say, well, yeah, I could handle it. But I'll remind you, this is an alien. It's going to be weird looking. It's not going to look like a space cow at all. It's going to look like something just bizarre and strange. Think of something like an oyster. And you got to wonder, who was the first person to find an oyster in the ocean and think, oh, that looks edible? The only thing we can say is it's probably somebody who was really, really hungry. Yeah, then you learn, yeah, this tastes pretty good. But still, it's non-trivial to overcome those obstacles. As another example, let me point you at something that we can find right here on planet Earth. Here's an organism. Would you want to eat this? It's called sea vomit. Yeah, the name is very descriptive. It's actually very closely related to us, relatively speaking. It's more closely related to us than lobsters, for instance. This is a chordate, and it forms these masses, these strange colored masses of gooey stuff, and it's appropriately called sea vomit. You got to figure anything that we find on another planet is going to be weirder looking than this. It's going to be unfamiliar. It's going to be worse than an oyster. It's going to be worse than a cockroach, and you're supposed to eat it. Okay, let me give you an example from the science fiction movies. I'm going to show you a short clip of about a minute long from the movie Annihilation. And it's going to combine all of these things. I'll warn you right now, it's a little bit bloody and gory. Okay, yeah. And also is going to look weird and creepy. So just take a moment to watch this. And if you're one of those people who can't stand bloody things, go ahead, close your eyes, and then you can open them again when you hear my voice. There. Okay, it's safe to open your eyes now. Those of you who watched it, are you feeling peckish? Did that look appetizing to you? Just think about it. This is what you would have to do if you find an alien and you wanted to eat it. You would have to open it up, and you would discover things that look unfamiliar and very strange, and don't stimulate those gastric juices to flow at all, I hope. So there is the risk that we'll have a few psychopaths on this trip who will get thrilled by this, but no, most of you normal people, no, that's not at all interesting to you. Next thing I want to talk about is there's another problem. Let's say we land and we find these creatures and we want to eat them, and they are all conveniently made of L-amino acids, so there's no conflict there. Next problem is those R groups I mentioned earlier. In Earth life, we have a grand total of 20 amino acids that we can synthesize into proteins. These are called the proteinogenic amino acids. So all life on Earth uses these same 20 amino acids to make their proteins. They can also post-translationally modify them and things like this, but we won't get into that. Okay, so the genetic code specifies these 20 amino acids. There are many more than 20 amino acids possible. That's just a subset that we use in our proteins. If you look at plants, for instance, plants synthesize something like 200 different kinds of amino acids, all for different purposes. Only the 20 are built into proteins, but they find purposes for these other 20 amino acids, or the other amino acids beyond 20. Often the primary purpose here is defensive. Why? Because other amino acids in many cases are toxic. So plants have enzymes to synthesize L-amino acids, just like all the other amino acids, but these amino acids are weird and strange, and if you ingest them, they muck you up. So that's a worry. What if we discover that on this world that they have, maybe they have 20 or so amino acids just like us, but they have some slightly different ones than the familiar 20 for Earth life, and they incorporate those into all of their proteins. Now there's potential problem. So for example, here's one. This is a molecule canavanine, and it was in the news a while back. First of all, look at the top. That's the canavanine, and below that is one of the more normal, so-called amino acids that we use in synthesizing our proteins. That's arginine. Arginine and canavanine look very, very similar, don't they? There's an O group. That's the only real difference that you have to worry about there. Okay. What does this do? Where do we find this? Well, there are certain plants that synthesize canavanine, and they do it as a defensive measure. Because when organisms eat canavanine, they ingest it, gets absorbed, and then it cools the protein synthesis machinery, and it gets incorporated into proteins as arginine would. So it substitutes for arginine in proteins. And that's not good because that O up there, it's got slightly different shape and it's got different chemical properties. So what you end up with is malformed proteins that don't do their function. So like I said, these plants are using this to protect themselves from consumption by passing herbivores. I mentioned it was in the news lately because you may have heard of Chris Mccandless, the young man who hitchhiked to Alaska and wandered into the wilderness and starved to death in a bus there. One of the possible agents that may have crippled him and led to his death is he consumed some of these plants in Alaska that express canavanine, and in certain doses, in certain conditions, it can cause serious crippling problems in the health of the individual who consumes them. Now, there's a little controversy there because it turns out that under normal conditions, if you're a healthy, well-off young man and you consume these plants, which are like less than 1% canavanine, what happens is you just kind of sluice it out. It passes right through you. So you're going to be running to the bathroom a bit. But it's thought that Chris Mccandless may have been more susceptible because he was hungry. He wasn't getting a good diet. And his system may have tried to absorb more of this stuff than it should, and it led to a serious illness. Okay, so that's a mild possibility. What if we encounter an alien life form that instead of using arginine, uses canavanine in all of its proteins? That would not be good. You would eat it and uh-oh, you're in trouble. Okay, but like I said, that's a mild problem. Here's another problem. This is called quisqualic acid. And this again is an amino acid. You can see I got the little gray dot there. That's the central carbon. There's our amino group and our carboxyl group. And there is the R group with that big circular structure over there on the right. Quisqualic acid is really toxic. What quisqualic acid will do is it will act as an excitotoxin. If it gets into your nervous system, it binds irreversibly to ion channels in your neurons, and it just makes them fire continuously, and they deplete themselves of all of their ions, and the cells die. So it kills a subset of your nervous system. This is not a good thing. So There's lots of amino acids like this that are literally neurotoxins. So you're wandering around this alien planet, you're ingesting something that contains quasqualic acid, and what you will end up is you'll be on the ground convulsing. Okay, not a good thing. So these are also fairly common. There's lots of amino acids that do this sort of thing. Now, beyond that, there's another problem. As I mentioned, these are monomers, and they get assembled into peptides and proteins. Here's the thing. Even if we go to a planet and it uses our canonical 20 amino acids, and they're all L amino acids, it's going to be synthesizing peptides and proteins for its purposes, not for ours. Good example of where this is problematic. These are the Kona Toxins. There is a snail from the South Pacific, the Kona snail, which produces the most toxic venoms around. And what are these venoms made up of? They're short 10 to 30 amino acid peptides. So they're not big proteins, they're not elaborate proteins. They're just little bitty small peptides. They make lots of them. And each of these peptides has a unique property in what it does to their prey. So the Kona snail wanders around. It's got a little proboscis that it snaps into prey items, and it injects them with lots of this Kona toxin, a mixture, a cocktail of Kona toxin. And some of them do things like bind to sodium channels or potassium channels or calcium channels. Others have all kinds of bizarre effects. I knew a lab once where they were working on these things, and for instance, they'd isolate individual Kona toxins. They'd inject a mouse with one, and it would instantly fall asleep. Not necessarily a good sleep, but it was just totally unconscious at that point. Others where it would induce rigid paralysis. The poor mouse would just freeze up solid and be unable to move. Others where it would just stop their heart cold. There's this mixture of these things. Now, we're going to go to an alien planet. We don't know what kind of peptides they make. So yeah, you might bite into that tasty looking beast over there that looks like a cross between a cockroach and an oyster. And the first thing that'll happen is you get a mouthful of these venoms and boom, you're dead. It could happen. You know, you're questioning me? You think maybe that wouldn't happen? Just try going out into the woods sometime here on Earth and wander around, and what you will find is lots of organisms that produce all kinds of interesting toxins that will kill you if you eat them. So there on the left, that big juicy looking mushroom, that's Amanita. You don't want to eat it, you'll die. There at the top right, that's deadly Nightshade. Yeah, belladonna, you don't want that in your mouth. And then down below there, it's probably not going to kill you, but you know, you recognize poison ivy. It's going to have horrible effects if you just touch it. You don't want to try eating it, okay? So there's all kinds of things just here on Earth that are trying to kill you. They're trying to defend themselves against being eaten. The creatures we encounter on an alien world would have that. Some of them would have all these toxins they use for defensive purposes, but they would also have, just by chance, a collection of amino acids, peptides, carbohydrates, all kinds of things that are alien to us and have incredibly toxic effects on human beings. So, yeah, don't bite the aliens. Another thing I would point out about this is we sort of take this for granted, but walking around on Earth, you are breathing an incredible soup of living organisms. They're everywhere. Any of you who have serious allergies, you know this. The rest of us were fine just because we don't have these allergies and we've got defenses against them. But the atmosphere is, all those things you smell as you're walking around, most of those are going to, or many of those are going to be biological compounds. There's going to be bacteria and viruses floating about in the environment that you're going to breathe in. Okay. Uh, there are organisms that spew out all kinds of things like pollen and spores that will enter your lungs. And if they find a nice habitat there, they'll grow. And we've got defenses against those. We're used to those things. We've evolved to overcome them. You go to another world and, oh man, who knows what you're breathing in? So imagine you land on this lush planet and you've got your chemical sensors and they say, oh, the atmosphere is about 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, trace amounts of carbon dioxide. You know your physical chemistry and you say, oh, that sounds great. I can breathe that. And you take your helmet off and you take a big snootful of fresh air. And immediately what you discover is that there are these pollen grains everywhere that are coated with the amino acid quasqualic acid. And yeah, you're dead. Or that contain the equivalent of a Kona toxin. Again, you're dead. Not from eating anything, but just from breathing it. So this is another thing I recommend. Don't breathe the air on alien worlds until it's been thoroughly tested biologically. Okay, that brings me to another point I want to make. So as I mentioned earlier, I think it's highly unlikely that we will uncover intelligent aliens anywhere in the universe as we travel around, if we ever travel around. And there are a number of explanations for why this would happen. I tend to favor biological explanations that say, intelligent life is rare on this planet. Why would we expect it to be more common elsewhere in the universe? So, yeah, I kind of expect that there's going to be lots of Earth-like planets in the habitable zones of their stars that have amino acids, that have some level of proteins, that have carbohydrates, that have all these common molecules of life. And a substantial subset of those, because I think life tends to emerge fairly easily, will have lots of organisms on them. But most of them will be single-celled bacteria, things like that, bacteria-like. They wouldn't be bacteria because they have a completely different origin. So just consider that here on Earth, about 4 billion years of our history were spent either with no life or with only single-celled life. And the multicellular stuff is a recent innovation. So yeah, I expect go to a random planet with capability of life. You'll find life, but most often what you'll find is single-celled life. Okay, so we're going to see them only rarely. But these are some other explanations. That's related to the first one on this list, the rare earth theory, which is the idea that intelligent life is so rare that we're the only fortuitous examples of that are anywhere in nearby proximity. That's also related to the last one, in a faraway galaxy. They're too far and out of our reach. That's kind of a silly hypothesis because the nearest star to us is about 5 light years away, and that's too far and out of our reach. So every star is basically out of our reach at this time, but okay. Another possibility listed here that is the Great Filter Theory. And that is the idea that other intelligent aliens evolved, but they died in mass extinction events. That seems reasonable to me. So I think, if you've got periodic mass extinctions within life on a planet, that's going to limit how long a civilization can last right there. It may be that having a civilization in itself, where you exploit major aspects of the resources of your planet, is also deadly to your species, as we're discovering now. So yeah, it's quite possible that life arose more often, but it just died out. The early bird theory, no, I don't care for that one at all, because that's kind of that's kind of arguing that humans are exceptional, and I really don't think we are particularly exceptional. The idea of different kinds of life, sure, that there may be other kinds of life. I don't think that affects the likelihood of our kind of life arising, though. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's just a natural consequence of planetary chemistry that will build these kinds of creatures if the opportunity arises. The Great Silence Theory is kind of interesting. Okay, so maybe we're just not far enough along on the civilization ladder to attract the attention of any other aliens. But in line with what I've been arguing about so far, let me offer another hypothesis that hasn't been mentioned here. And that is that life in itself is toxic to other forms of life. So it may be that, if we do develop some kind of interstellar flight capability, what we'll discover is that any planet like ours with life on it will be divergent enough that exposure to that life is lethal. That, as I mentioned, the example of just stepping out of your spaceship and taking a deep breath of the air might kill you, because any planet with an extensive amount of life on it will be building an elaborate structure around itself, a biome where the atmosphere, the earth, everything is saturated with living organisms, which means that all these alien worlds with life on them may be so intrinsically hostile to our kind of biology that we can't visit them. We would just die on the spot. So what's going on then is every intelligent species that develops space travel sends robot probes out, and what they discover is that any stellar system that has life on it right now is off limits. It is so contaminated with biological agents, basically the equivalent of a mass of nerve gas floating around the planet, that you can't possibly visit it. So what's going on with all these alien species? They're all sitting there mapping out their local neighborhood, and they're putting great big biohazard symbols on any star system that has carbon-based life thriving on a planet somewhere. And it doesn't matter if it's at the single-celled soup stage or if it's intelligent life, they just cannot possibly coexist together. Now, this is an idea that's been around for a long time. H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds. Think of that one. I would say that H.G. Wells kind of underplayed it. That if an alien life form landed here, I would suggest it's probably going to get sick really, really fast. The whole business of colonizing a world that's already inhabited by biological organisms is going to be so onerous. You would have to sterilize it totally in order to make it habitable. So why bother? A lot of extra effort. What may happen is that if we explore the universe, we would find that the most attractive kinds of worlds are not the ones like ours that have life on them, but places like Mars, which are basically sterile already, so you don't need to go through the sterilization process, and that you can then go about terraforming with your kind of compatible life in order to inhabit it. You may be saying to yourself that this sounds like an awfully pessimistic view of the universe. And yeah, I agree, it kind of is. And you might then ask yourself, but then if life is so inimical to other life, how do we survive here on Earth, which is full of diverse life forms? And I actually have 3 different reasons why this isn't such a big worry with us. And it turns out that every single one of them involves evolution. Okay, the first answer for why we're not worrying about it here on Earth is that all life on Earth has a common origin. We're all descended from a single set of organisms, population of organisms, that made common decisions. So they're all using L amino acids, for example. But we don't have to worry about that. So we're all using the same biochemical mechanisms for our metabolism. So because we share this, that means that we can consume our cousins. They're not really weird as far as biochemistry goes. Second reason is another evolutionary reason, and that is that life has diverged on planet Earth, all right? We follow different strategies, but in general, if you've got organisms living in similar habitats, there is strong pressure to be able to coexist, that we adapt to live with the organisms we're living with. We get examples where we are no longer compatible. So, for example, deep sea worms that use hydrogen sulfide as an energy source, you could not eat those. So they've gone far, far afield from our basic metabolism. That makes them hostile to our consumption. But other organisms that live in similar environments to us, no, they're still going to work together. So we're heterotrophs. That means we have to live on other organisms. We have to consume them. So if you are a heterotroph, you would not last long if you were incompatible biochemically with the prey items that you're eating. Okay, so that's not an issue. And the third reason is that I consider probably a more important force in evolution than competition is cooperation. That what we find as we look in the world around us is that organisms tend to live in elaborate food webs that maximizes the extraction of energy from the environment. And you have to have different organisms occupying different niches in order to be able to do that. So we're all cooperating, and it's not altruistic cooperation, is that we know that we can maximize. Actually, it's not that we know, it's that we respond well to this particular situation. That different organisms working together maximize the output from a biome that produces more energy that is accessible to us. So we constantly work to refine these food webs. This is one of the problems with invasive species, is you get invasive species coming in and they disrupt the food web and you get less efficient extraction of energy from the environment. Okay, so an alien species would be the most invasive species possible. It would thoroughly disrupt our food webs. It would also find no way to fit into our existing web of interactions. So it would not be good for them. So that's my bottom line, is I think there's an evolutionary argument to say that alien species would be biochemically incompatible with us. We should not eat them. That there is a good reason why life on Earth maintains its compatibility, at least in similar environments. And I'm sorry, Charlie Jane Anders, you don't have to worry about it. Yes, it would be impolite to eat the alien visitor, but fortunately for these aliens behind me, if we did try it, we would immediately suffer the consequences of it and die. I noticed my alien visitors are also behind a force field to prevent any interaction with earthly life. And that's good sense on their part, because if they ate us, they would probably die as well. So just remember that scene from the end of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. I'm not too worried about alien invaders. They're going to die if they try and eat us. But I will also point out those alien invaders, and this is something H.G. Wells neglected to mention, these alien invaders would also be coming with their own collection of germs and biological agents, and they would probably be spreading a kind of nasty plague all over the planet as well, or at least producing toxins that would kill anybody who came near them. Is that reassuring? I don't know. Okay, we'll talk to you later. Have fun.